Well, there we go then. The news that I think a lot of people had been hoping for and possibly expecting as well. Dean Smith sacked as the head coach of Norwich City after yet another dismal display last night to Luton Town. It's been probably a long time coming, actually. I think the club had hoped that form would turn and Dean Smith would be the man to lead Norwich City forwards in the coming years. Unfortunately, that didn't apply. And after a really poor season, Dean Smith has been sacked as the head coach of Norwich City on the 27th of December. It's been a really damning couple of months for Norwich City. Remarkably, at time of recording, Norwich is still within the top six in 5th place. That may be part of the reason of the sacking now, that Norwich is still just about in touching distance of possible promotion back to the Premier League. But it seemed very unlikely it would have come under Dean Smith. I think they were hoping for an improvement in performances and therefore results, and I think that was probably the reason why he wasn't sacked pre-World Cup when a lot of fans were calling for him to go, but that hasn't come. Recent defeats to Luton Town and of course at home to Blackburn Rovers was the end. It simply made his job untenable. The game against Blackburn, you could probably just about, and I'm talking about real clinging on to straws here, just about let off because of Blackburn's form in recent months, and at least we had some chances in that game. The defeat to Luton was simply unforgivable. A 2-1 defeat at one point. We were playing at 1-1 against 10 men and Norwich City still found a way to lose. It's been a disastrous campaign for Dean Smith. I remember his first game against Southampton in the Premier League, and I think there was hope around the place. Daniel Farke's regime had come to an end. Of course, there were still some fans upset that he'd been sacked, particularly after a win. We beat Southampton. It was our first Premier League win in quite some time. And although there wasn't a particular difference in football, it felt as if this was a man who was pragmatic and can find ways to win. Not necessarily an outright style, but could dig in and fight in the Premier League. And look, we all know how that Premier League campaign ended. It was poor for the majority. There were a couple of highlights in there, but not really too much of an improvement on what we'd seen under Daniel. And then the worry was, well, if this is a man who can simply find ways to win and doesn't have a particular style, then we could struggle in the Championship because it's a longer season. And if you are losing football matches, that you will in the Championship, because every team does, no matter if you're 1st or 24th, then them defeats are going to need to be good performances and also a decent display of football. And we haven't seen either. We've seen some form, some winning form. There was that nice 10-game unbeaten run a couple of months back, and that kind of propelled us into the top 6, where we've pretty much been all season. But even during that, none of them were particularly convincing, and even the performances that maybe were more convincing, we weren't, scoring hatfuls of goals. And I don't think any Norwich fan expects to win every week, but they certainly expect to be entertained in the majority of the time. And I think as well, a lot of fans have maybe been criticised, particularly by Aston Villa fans, for maybe the harsh treatment of Dean Smith. And I think that's unfair, because I can't think of too many more fan bases that are more patient than the Norwich fans. I've been relatively supportive of Dean Smith compared to the majority, and I stand by that stance. I was willing to give him a chance, and I was willing to give him a chance mainly because I could see some bright sparks in there, not many, but some, and I just didn't believe that Norwich would sack him as early as some were calling for him. But you can't continue in the fashion that Norwich have been and expect anything other than mid-table mediocrity, if not worse. It's an important run of fixtures coming up for Norwich now. We've got 3 consecutive home games. I think the timing was probably down to that. Reading and Watford, both in the league, both on the telly, and then a cup game against Blackburn Rovers. So straight into the deep end for whoever the new manager will be. But just a really disastrous kind of, 18 months or so for Dean. And I was about to say I feel sorry for him. I don't feel sorry for him. He's had the time. He's had far more time than I think most clubs would have given him. He hasn't helped himself with some of his comments directed towards the fans. Some I've agreed with, some I've thought are just outright stupid. and it was almost just, coming to the end. You could tell he couldn't care. And that's only going to go one way. Once you lose the fans, it's game over for any manager at any football club. If the fans are gone, it's going to be an almighty battle to get them back on side, and just couldn't see that happening. What I would add to all of this is the fact that problems run far deeper at Norwich City, I think, at the moment. It's simply not going to change everything. We may well see an upturn in form, and I think we've got a squad good enough to still compete at the very top level of this league. We haven't been doing that in recent weeks. So I suspect there will be an upturn in results, and I bloody hope so, because it's been awful in recent weeks and months. But the fact that Dean Smith was appointed in the first place, I think was almost the opposite of Daniel Farke. There was a lovable element about Daniel Farke. He connected with the fans. There was a clear style. And look, all of these things have negatives as well. But to go from a Farke to a Dean Smith, it's polar opposites. And that's only going to work if Dean Smith is putting up really good performances week in, week out, and that simply hasn't happened. As I say, I think whoever comes into Norwich, it's a relatively attractive job. You've got a team who are still in the top six and are now managerless. That probably doesn't happen too often. You've got a very good squad of players. Just looking at the bench last night against Luton, an array of talent. You've got Todd Cantwell, who's not even in the squad. So the players and the personnel are there. My worry is about the top brass at Norwich City. I think that's a concern. I think the dynamic there is a concern. I question Stuart Webber at the moment. I'd like to be hearing from our sporting director more often. He was a man that, built his reputation at Norwich City on communicating with fans, transparency at the top, and that simply isn't happening, and whether his heart is fully in the job still remains to be cleared up. I guess we just have to look forward now. We all know how bad it's been under Smith. Who will take over the reins? I put out a quick tweet earlier to say, who would you like to see? This is the exciting part now. We get to, fantasise about who will be the next man to lead Norwich City forwards. Russell Martin, high up on the list. Hassan Hootel seems optimistic, but you never know. Mark Robbins was mentioned lots of times, and Knutson, who was mentioned lots of times after the departure of Daniel Farke. Look, I think with all of these managerial appointments, often the best ones are the ones you don't expect or maybe haven't heard of so much. I think when Dean Smith was announced, we were all quite excited because we knew who he was and we were aware of his time at Aston Villa and Brentford. We didn't know who Daniel Farke was when he joined the football club, and that worked out so well. So I think we may well have a couple of days now of, the rumours and all of that. Often the best appointments are those that we either weren't expecting or weren't aware of. All in all, just a really sad era for Norwich City. Very few positives to come out of it. I desperately wanted it to work for Dean, and I did for Craig Shakespeare as well. I'm sure they'll go on to have good managerial careers wherever they go, but it simply wasn't the right fit for Norwich in the end. We gave it time. Norwich City gave it time, but it was never going to work, was it? I think deep down we probably all knew that. Anyway, let me know who you want to see next at the football club, and we've got a big few weeks ahead. It will be interesting to see who leads Norwich City out in the next few games at Carrow Road. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you all again very soon. Bye-bye.